The following podcast is a presentation of Project Entertainment Network.
Welcome back for the second half of my in-depth look at the Planet of the Apes original 5-film arc. I hope you've been enjoying this look, and we're going to get right into it with the sequels. I'm going to put it out there that this look at Planet of the Apes as a series is going to be full of spoilers. I cannot really discuss the themes of these films without talking about their plots, and I'm going to talk about some things that if you haven't seen them, might feel like they're going to stop you from being able to enjoy it. But I will say that so much happens in these movies that the plot, while it has important through lines, there's a lot going on, and I think you can still enjoy these films even if you know some of these key moments. But I hope maybe now you're just going to go back and revisit some films you haven't watched since you were a kid. So the second film is Beneath the Planet of the Apes. Really quickly, I'm not going to give as much time to the sequels, but let's get through this. Beneath happens because obviously that this is like this huge cultural phenomenon, and they're like, whoa, we got to capitalize on this. But here's the crazy thing about how 20th Century Fox thinks, and when you know more about filmmaking, this isn't, or especially Hollywood filmmaking, this isn't too crazy, is that they essentially slash the budget each film almost in half. So, giving them half as much money as they had making the original, they say, okay, make a sequel, and it's got to be big and huge, it's got to outdo it. Yeah, so how do you do that? Well, they bring Bull in. Bull writes this kind of treatment for what I think he believes, he calls it Planet of Men, or something like this, which is kind of supposed to show, you know, this switch happening back, but they kind of throw that away, and they say all his stuff is too bleak. But what you do get is they bring in Paul Dean, who was a British screenwriter, worked on quite a few things, including some of the James Bond films. So what he does is he comes up with, well, we should see more of the humans. So they show Ape Society even bigger. You have these huge crowd shots, and because there's less budget, but now you've got more extras, you need more costumes, things get a little fudged. But the big bonus is they already got the sets from the first film, because most of it's still there. It's only like a year or two later. And what they do is they create, instead of the cool prosthetics you see for the features, which you still see that on the featured apes, now you see these pull-on masks. And while these pull-on masks are used in these big crowd shots, and it's really obvious. Unfortunately, this movie definitely can show that it's less budget. It's a little quick to write the script. You got to remember that they had years and years of passes and different writers who contributed to the original Planet of the Apes. Now it's pretty much like, Bull, we're not into that idea, let's give it to somebody else, we'll go with what he makes. So it's a much quicker decision. You have this idea of worshipping the bomb. You have this kind of bombed out area that had been Earth, New York City on Earth. William Kruber is the production designer on, I believe, the entire series. So Kruber gets him in touch with production companies he knows in New York, and he says, do me a favor, I have these images from books, can you take some photographs, some reference images? So he combines these images, kind of like archival images of New York and New York photos that were taken for them, and has an artist touch them up to kind of demolish them a little bit, and uses those as matte paintings. So, as he puts it, it was practically free to make the sets for the human side of the city, and with the pre-existing ape side. So they do find ways around their budgetary restraints. The thing that really sells this is Jacobs and Zanuck say, well, we need Heston back. You can't make this movie without it. So Charlton Heston's like, really? I mean, okay, I get it, it made a lot of money, but sequels, you have to also remember there's a time when sequels were not the norm. You didn't really think of things as franchises, right? So, yeah, you would have series of films that would go on and on and on, like maybe westerns or cop films, but it wasn't really common. It wasn't a goal. So Heston was kind of figured he was like one and done, and he'd be out. And what they say is, no, we can't make this movie without you, so we really need you. How about, you know, just as a cameo? So he says, all right, I get it, you need me. All right, and I, you know, without you guys, I wouldn't have had this movie, so I kind of owe you a debt because it totally bolsters his, you know, status and makes him far more sought after as an actor. All right, he agrees. Look, I gave you one scene in the beginning of the movie, but you gotta kill me so if you make more sequels, I don't have to be in them. So they agreed to that. They go then, they go with the script, he comes up, they're like, okay, wait, what if you just kind of are briefly seen in the beginning, then you go missing until the very end of the film, and then you die. So Heston's like, alright, so it's like one long scene for him. So he agrees to that. He's really not happy to be there. The biggest loss really from this movie is Roddy McDowall's not there because he's in England. He'd already been slated to direct his own film in England, so he's gone. He's not around. You still have Kim Hunter as Zira. Kim Hunter is consistent for the first 3 films and is, you know, an amazing part of how the Apes work so well because the character of Zira is the most disruptive of all of Ape society. You know, she has no problem speaking her mind, and she really is what saves to me this film because she'll blatantly protest and tell them that they're lying to their faces. And that's important. That's like the kind of the underlying element. It is kind of interesting to see that this film does show a scene where the apes have decided, they found out that there's more humans in the Forbidden Zone. They're going to go out there and they're going to take over and they're going to fight whatever they find. And the chimpanzees, of course, are the pacifists, and because they're the thinkers, right? And they protest, like literally protest. They march with signs. They have sit-in, and they are rounded up by the gorillas and thrown in cages for their effort. So you have this very, I mean, we're going through Vietnam at this point, so this is a very common scene, and we're seeing it with the apes. So that's probably one of the most effective scenes in the film for me. Essentially, you have another ship that comes from our present day, is in the future, trying to find Taylor. You have one astronaut survive, he's Brent, and Brent is looking for Taylor, and of course, so you have this kind of rehashing of, oh my god, the world's upside down. There's apes, and they're in charge of humans. You know, like, he's got to go through all that, so we can get to go through that again, which do we really need to? Nova, who had been at Taylor's side until he got missing, when he falls in, essentially, at the Forbidden Zone, she finds him, so we still have Nova as a link to the original story. She brings him to Zira and Cornelius. The cycle, again, of trying to save Taylor. In many ways, this film falls kind of flat for me because I don't think... I think we're rehashing the story too soon. Also, when they do get... Like, the scenes in Ape City, I think, are great. And the first half of the film is very evocative of what's going on in the time. You have the military leader of Ursa, who's leading this kind of rally that the only good human is a dead human. And, you know, you have all these rallying up the troops, and that's when you have Zira, who's the only person not applauding in this kind of, yes, let's go to war, let's get rid of all the humans, let's just have apes, and we will, you know, retain our dominancy on society, and blah, blah, blah. And how do we know Taylor wasn't just one of many? We have to find his tribe. They're still into this kind of delusion. So the first, say, half hour of the film, I think, is strong. You get to the Forbidden Zone, and it's a lot of, you realize that these humans have mutated because of their hanging out with a nuclear bomb all this time, and they are telepathic. So many sci-fi tropes that are just all lumped into this one, and they're projecting. So all these awful things that they're always seen in the Forbidden Zone is the minds of these kind of defenders of what is left of humanity, projecting awful things like fires and brimstone, essentially, to keep out the apes. And then when they figure out, hey, that's not real anymore because they can't hold it up, you know, that's when the war starts. They invade, and these humans who have by this point shown to Taylor and Brent that they can remove their fake skins and all you see is what they really look like. How did they make those fake skins? Why do they wear them around each other? Why are they speaking English A, or A speaking out loud when they're telepathic, even though they don't need to? They have a church service where they worship the bomb that's there. Why would they have done any of that verbally when they could have done it in their minds? So many questions I don't think this film really wants to get into. But in the end, it's this theory that we gotta blow it up. And they worship the bomb knowing that when the apes come, they're gonna have to set it off. The apes see it, they want it, they don't know what it is, but it's technology they don't have, so they want to bring it back. And you have Taylor and Brent stuck in this kind of turmoil. They're shot down, both of them, but in his dying breath, he sets off the bomb. So Taylor gets to prove that he will definitely not be back in any sequels. Not only is Heston shot, but Heston kills everybody else. He sets off the bomb. This I had read was also a moment that was added at the last minute by Zanuck, the producer, who was at that point already fired. So he's like, blow it up. I don't want you to make any more anyway. I'm not going to be here. So it's a bleak ending, particularly for a G-rated film, I would think, to blow up the planet. But you would think they also kind of just put themselves in a box that they can't get out of. I don't know. They figured out a way because the box office, again, especially because they cut the budget in half, exceeded what they spent. I think by 3 times. Because the world was just like clamoring for more Planet of the Apes. So, this leads to Escape from the Planet of the Apes. So this is, I'm not gonna lie, this is one of my favorite films in all of science fiction. And growing up, this was like my favorite, I think, in the series. But I think that slowly evolved over time. But Escape from the Planet of the Apes is a wonderful story of the few surviving apes from our future landing in present-day America. And this is kind of issue I have, is that we have this new character who's made up after the planet's blown up, of Dr. Milo, who is supposedly like the Da Vinci of the apes that we've never met in 2 films, who has been this whole time tinkering with Heston's spaceship, and he figures out how to work the damn thing, and he gets Cornelius and Zira and the 3 of them, because they know the war is imminent, they know the gorillas are going to war with anything, and then this could ruin society, and they don't even know there's a bomb, but as they're exiting by spaceship, they see the world blown up. Interesting fact was, I did not realize until watching some of the extras in this box set and some of the other documentaries I have, they actually filmed them exiting. So it was just like how the first film picks up exactly, or the second film picks up where the first film was exactly. This was supposed to do the same thing, and you're supposed to see them in a ship watching the planet explode. But they decided that it was more effective to start with the craft being found in the waters in California and the military going down, and they take off the helmets, and lo and behold, it's apes. We have aponauts. So, what I love about this story is it takes everything from the first film and it inverts it and it flips it. And it went from Taylor being the only human to now all humans and just Zira and Cornelius. And what's great about that is you see a lot of the juxtapositions again, kind of put back in our face of how strange things are. Particularly once they become the media darlings that they become, once it's known that they're intelligent, they're rushed off to get modern clothing and to go partake in human things, and they split them up at points. Zira goes to a feminist discussion. This would be ERA time period, I'm assuming. We're talking early 70s, so this could be like some ERA type luncheon, and she talks just like any feminist woman would about, you know, we have brains, let us use them, why are we not the equals to our husbands, and all of this coming from an ape, and a room of women, human women, applauding her for saying it. So that's a lovely little moment. And then they choose for Cornelius, the guys take him to a boxing match, and he's just appalled by how violent, and when he's asked, you know, by what do you think? And he's like, oh, it's barbaric, and they laugh, and it's like, because it is barbaric. Why do we do that? I don't know. So I love those moments, those juxtapositions. Of course, there's this beautiful party scene that they have, which looks like a tame version of like a Warhol party, where there's this bizarre flower people stuff going on in the midst of all these people in expensive suits and very intellectual discussion. And they give Zira a glass of champagne, and one of my favorite moments is when she asks, well, what is it? It's bubbly. Think of it like grape juice plus. So yes, champagne for me will always be grape juice plus. But of course, before we get to all that fun stuff there, you have the scenes when they are captured and brought to the zoo. And they're kind of living in this cage. And the humans don't know yet that they can talk, but they've realized that they're intelligent. So you have the two kind of animal psychologists that are brought in to work with them and discover more about these strange apes that arrived. This is the return of Natalie Trundy, who we saw in the second film, who, if you remember, was in that original screen test as Zira. In the second one, she's one of the mutant humans underground, and now she's a very prominent character who it befriends and actually becomes kind of like two of the only friends that the apes actually have for the good chunk of this story. So, and they do all these different tests to try to figure out, like you would like a human psychology test. And they set up this obstacle for Zira, where they dangle a banana in the cage, and there's all these things that she has to set it up. And this is probably, to me, a very defining moment of Zira as a character, and I will say has become a bit of a calling card for me as someone who uses the name Zira for most of my life online, where she easily solves the puzzle, runs up and just sits there and looks at the banana, and they're like, well, why doesn't she take it? And of course, my favorite line, I simply loathe bananas. It's gold. I love it. But this leads to like, oh my god, apes can talk, and then, you know, you get the whole reverse panic of the first film, which is wonderful. But of course, it's military America, so they are brought in, and you have, again, a trial, congressional trial, where this presidential committee has to assess, what do we do with these two apes, and is it true that they really are intelligent? Another great moment where they ask Zira if she knows her name. She says, Zira. Well, how do we know you mean it? And then there's this whole thing where they think she's parroting, and one of them asks, well, does the male speak? And, you know, we have Roddy McDowell back, which makes this even better. And he gets up and he says, only when she lets me. And I love that moment too. And it breaks everybody in the room down to laughing, you know, the press that's there. And it really sets the tone of this wonderful relationship between the two characters. And that shines for all of this film, and this is probably one of the reasons why this film works so well, is because the two of them working together. It helps. This is kind of McDowell coming back to the series, so they had a bond on the first film. It definitely carries over to this one. You go on this journey where you want them to survive. You empathize with them, and it's wonderful to see the characters all the way through this story. And you identify with them so much, and then there's this adversary in the scientific officer for the president, who basically advises the president, this is what leads to human downfall, so we need to nip this in the bud. And you have interrogations that happen where they want to find out more. What do you really know about how the planet got to be as it is? Do you know where you came from? Oh, you're from our future? Now you really need to tell us what that means. They drug Zira and get more out of her, and they find out she's pregnant. So all of this, you know, you have this kind of harsh, we need to get rid of this now. And it becomes a chase film. And it goes from this very lighthearted kind of fun little romp, like, hey, let's put some apes in modern America and see what it's like. And isn't this fun and zany, to, oh my god, you're going to kill them now. We know that they're intelligent creatures, and you want to murder them to stop our future, which is our fault. So it gets dark fast, and I love that twist. I love how it's portrayed by Kim Hunter and Roddy McDowell. Even though they're two people in ape costumes, you feel for them, and that's very important to me. The progression leads them to being hid at a circus so that she can give birth to her child, who they name Milo. to tie into that one ape who shows up for 5 minutes in the entire series. But anyway, Ricardo Montalban, if you're my age and you grew up with Fantasy Island, that's Ricardo Montalban. But in this film, he is this gentle man who takes them in, and he wants to help. Of course, they're pushed out, they can't stay, they get chased down, and they're brutally killed. Again, this is a family G-rated film. It gets really dark, and then it has a bleak end. All of these films end on such a bleak note. Like we said with the second film, the third film, yes, the budget was slashed again. They were made to do a lot with what they had. So the good news is they only had 3 apes that they had to worry about in costume. So they could put all of that effort in existing costume and existing makeup concepts so that they were able to work with that. And they saved a lot of money because they filmed in LA. They filmed in the shipyards. These were all physical places that already existed. So they did a lot with what they had to work with. So this sets the stage for Part 4, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. This is a film that I have really learned to love, and maybe as a kid I did not appreciate as much as I did with Escape. This is the important step in what we learn in Part 3 is the idea of recursion, where a story is going to go over and over and over and kind of envelope itself, and time travel. And this is how we go from what we've learned in all of the previous films into how it's going to happen, how we will lead to that planet that Heston saw in Part 1. It's because of Conquest. Roddy McDowall steals the show. He does this amazing thing where now we're in a world where there's been a plague on the cats and dogs. So there's a probe that brings radiation back, and the radiation does not affect humans, but it affects cats and dogs. Cats and dogs are gone. What are we going to do? We need pets, right? We're human. We need pets. So they bring in the apes. And after they have them as pets, they realize, hey, they're smart. We can domesticate them. Then it's not too far to fall for the apes to be actual slaves. So much like we see the human in the first film being, living in cages and doing menial things, now we have, it opens on a sequence where you see the process of how apes are assimilated. They are, again, we have them separated by those 3 races and classes. They wear jumpsuits that identify them easily to humans based on color. Red for gorilla, green for chimpanzee, orange for orangutans, which will echo the same color outfits that you see from the first few films where we're in ape society. So this is the origin of those color schemes, interestingly enough, but it's also clearly delineating them by class and what they can and can't do. But it's this process of almost this kind of repeated Pavlovian process to strike fear into the apes so that they will comply. And training them over and over through loudspeakers screaming no, and commands like go home when you mess up. And it's this, eventually you see how the apes are made into servants for humans. And the society at this point, we are in the vague future, and I believe it's 91 in this one. Luckily, they had a backlot that had been recently purchased to become commercial and residential areas, which looked very futuristic, or at the time, you'd say modern in the 70s, and they were able to use that as their cityscape. So again, saving money. Slash budget, now it's mostly apes, so they had to get past just those pullover makeups to make most of the apes look believable, but the jumpsuits help to eliminate a lot of the costume restraints, right? But this story escalates, and we see from the end of Escape the baby ape who has come through thanks to Armando in the circus is now grown and named Caesar. And Caesar is the intelligent talking ape son of Cornelius and Zira, played by Roddy McDowall. So Roddy McDowall gets to play his own son. He was in his 40s playing an 18-year-old. It's great things you can do with makeup, right? But you see him, because he knows this is wrong. Armando keeps him away from what regular human society is. Now that he's there, he sees it, he knows it's wrong. He has to fight back, and he becomes the prophecy that his parents had learned as children. the one ape who says no to a human. And it leads to this great struggle of helping them organize, helping them learn how to have this kind of civil disruption, and how they can start to intentionally make mistakes and intentionally hoard things that can be used against the humans when they rise up. And the film climaxes in this amazing riot scene, and it is a planned struggle against the military-like society of the humans. And we note that the humans all dress in black. They are such a structured, nameless society at this point. You don't see any clothing of color. The members of the police force and also ape management have almost Gestapo-like outfits that they wear. The governor of LA is a harsh leader who believes that all apes are useless, but are meant as our property. So you have this kind of struggle. In the end, Caesar is able to get to organize the apes, and they rise against. And the original cut of the film, the end was too violent. Yeah, at this point they bring in director J. Lee Thompson, who he was known more as like an action director, and he had made some action and thriller films, particularly the original Cape Fear, Guns of Navarone, big huge westerns. So he's brought in to make this more of an action adventure film, and his action sequences are, the studio tells him this is too bloody, this is too violent, too gory. They make a cut of the film, it goes out to some test screenings, and people cannot handle, because this is a G-rated film series, you have parents taking their kids out of the theater when it starts to get too violent. So they're told, you have to fix this is too gory for a G. So he cuts it a little. They end up redoing the Caesar's triumphant speech at the end. It's like really moving and passionate kind of call to arms, becomes also in the edit, goes from a call to arms, we must rise up, we must take over, we must get rid of mankind, to, but we should be humane, and we should be compassionate, and we should have hope for the future where we can all live together. So that was kind of a lessening of the blow of just how violent and, you know, kind of chaotic this film ends. And it brings it down to a PG-13. And it's also very hard at this point to not note the nature of this. Yes, this civil rights argument has progressed throughout the entirety of the series, and it just blossoms here. You know, these speeches are far more Malcolm X than they are Martin Luther King Jr. There's no time left for the peaceful protests of the second film. And the filmmakers know this, and they go into it wanting to tell this story. And where the producers of the past may have said that there was no initial intent to make such hardcore civil rights messages in the films, by now the filmmakers are saying, no, we are telling a story right now that is inspired by the fact that we're watching riots on our TV screen. They take the imagery in their heads from like the Watts riot, and that becomes what the final battle between the apes and the human military becomes, or the cops. So there's no bones about it by now. We're clearly saying, you know, this is a fight for civil rights, and that the apes should not be slaves. So the final part of the original 5-run Planet of the Apes series is Battle for the Planet of the Apes. Gonna admit this one's not one of my favorites, but it does have some cool stuff. This is kind of the film where we finally see like the resolution of Caesar's story. So the ape Caesar from the last two, he's now kind of the head of the government, if you want to say, for this new society, which is the post-nuke world, which is mostly apes, some humans, somewhat living together, what seems at first to be harmonious, but doesn't last long. We get a pretty quick glimpse that not everybody's happy that the humans are allowed to hang out in the same town. So there are more villages. This is even pre kind of like what we see in the first few films of what society looks like. This is more like tree houses and little village settings. So again, just like we saw with the last couple of sequels. Once again, it's time to make a new film. They're still doing big, even though there was all this controversy that Conquest was too violent for a family-friendly sci-fi series. It still generated plenty of interest and plenty of money, so they say, alright, gotta crank out one more at least. And we find out in this time they're also working on getting the property rights and everything figured out to move it into being a television series. But this is like, they go in knowing this is the last movie, so make it big, you know? Do something we can't do when we move to the small screen. So then it becomes the battle, right? Dane comes back one more time to fashion a story that shows kind of the major conflict that ends this kind of mingled civilization eventually. And it's much more this kind of idea of how does it go from this to what we see at the end. And it's that whole circle. Once again, it's this circle storytelling and how it all can fit in different order even, to the point to tell the same story. Part of this film that's not probably the best for me is, again, we see this kind of civilization of humans that are driven underground. This is, again, we're saying post-nuke, so these are the people who lived in the city that were too close to the explosion, I guess, and had to deal with the after effects of radiation by staying nearby, staying in an area that's definitely radioactive. And again, it's this idea of the struggle between the apes and humans, and how that kind of sets up class barriers and ideas of racial separation and all that. And it really does kind of say, these are the people over here that are living underground that are still grasping at what was left of the old way of society. And then the humans who are over with the apes are the ones who are more open to the idea of trying to be harmonious. And so that obviously those two can't coexist. The apes kind of go looking for information. It's this whole idea that, you know, Caesar never met his parents, but MacDonald, who's kind of his right-hand man, who's a human, black human, who is the brother, conveniently, of the MacDonald that we saw in the last story, says, well, there's archives. If we go to the what was the remains of the city, we can find the archives and we can see what your parents said, what they knew about the future, and, you know, how the world ended. You know, we'll hear that from them. So they go on this journey to find the information. Of course, that triggers the people who are kind of living in this conditioning of radiation underground, and of course it becomes this kind of two warring factors, and on both sides you have people that are like, but do we really need to go to war just to protect this? What are we protecting that's so important that we need to go to war for it? On both sides. And, you know, there's even one thing that is really cool back in the ape city before they leave is that Caesar has put one ape in charge of all of the weapons, and he has to act, his job is to be Caesar's conscious. So if you're going to go there and you're going to ask for a weapon, you have to have a conversation with him about, why do you need this gun? What is it really for? And is it important that you have a weapon to do it? And so they have to have this kind of philosophical debate about, you know, can you go on this mission without weapons? And yes, you will probably want to be able to defend yourself if there are people who are living there that are hostile towards you. So it's a self-defense. And then there's even an idea, like, okay, so we need a rifle, then do we need a gun? Well, why do you need a handgun if you have a rifle? Well, all the apes are vegetarian. You're the one human, well, I mean, there's three on this trip. The one human who goes, you know, well, he eats meat, so he may want to kill something to eat, like a rabbit. So he says, here's one handgun, you don't need three, and enjoy your supper. And that's probably like one of the best moments for me, is that little exchange where they have to debate the need for guns, which I thought was pretty cool. The third person in that party is Virgil, who's an orangutan, who is kind of the high point of this entry in the films. He's the intellectual of the group. He's the one who best grasps science and philosophy, and how those work together I find fascinating in the orangutans. And of course the other side of that is that you have Ursus, who is the head of the gorillas, who is the militant, who is the one who does not want to learn how to read when all the others are being taught how to read. He does not care about that. He just wants to go on horseback. He wants to play with guns. You know, he's like this paternal, or this eternal child who is just violent in nature. And he leads the gorillas into this kind of uproar that makes them want to go to war. So there's always this kind of constant battle within the ape society, that there's like always a gorilla who's fighting for them to be more active, more proactive in staying, the defenders of their own kingdom, as it were. So the dynamics in those are interesting. This film, more than any in the series, I could say the main punch of it is the anti-violence and anti-war sentiment. It's really what the whole thing is about. Even though Caesar had been this kind of leader who used violence in the past, how now he was learning to be pacifist, and that it wasn't necessary to always be the violent aggressor. So those are some definite themes. You see him dealing with his own son, who he's named Cornelius, in honor of his father, who he never met. There's some interesting interactions. The big issue that this film fails from is that obvious lack of budget, where the humans that are living underground, their irradiated kind of demeanor is kind of, it's very kind of plays off of other films that have come before it that are like that. It's interesting to note that the people who kind of came in to finish the script on this one were the same couple who made the Omega Man, who wrote the screenplay for the Omega Man. And I found a lot of similarities between the vampires that you see in Omega Man and the way the irradiated, or the radiated humans are in battle. But they talk a lot about, again, Thompson's on this one as well, and he talks about how, we had less budget, we had to do things like we don't have as many extras as we want in a battle scene, so what do? We shoot more close-ups, we cut quicker, we try to make it look like there's more on the battlefield. Is the best example of how this series kind of suffers. But again, makeup and costumes are great. The village is believable for this part in their existence. It's also interesting to note that you have the character of the lawgiver, who is the statue we see in, going back into the first film, of the lawgiver. He is here kind of bookending the piece, almost like a narrator telling the story to children of how the battle for the Planet of the Apes happened. And that is played by John Huston. Now, if you're like me and you grew up a nerdy kid, John Huston to me was the voice of Gandalf in the Rankin Bass animated. So that's fun for me. Of course, Huston is also known as being, writer, director, producer, actor, outside of genre work, but to me that's you hear that voice, it's Gandalf. I mean, it's not my favorite film in the series, but it does have some great moments. Much like how Conquest had to get re-edited to not be too bleak, this film goes in knowing that it has to be a more hopeful end to a series. There's this kind of idea that society can all get together and get along. The end sequence where human children and ape children are learning together from the lawgiver is supposed to be this kind of hopeful image of the future, which we know, unless the timeline has changed, isn't what the future is going to look like. So there is the idea that, did we now change the timeline, and will Earth evolve to have less of a ruling society and more togetherness? Which, interesting place to leave it. But doesn't really leave it, because, as you could say, you could go now onto the TV show. Now, also to put it in perspective of just how popular these movies were, I mean, the entire cycle takes place pre-Star Wars, and this is pretty much the series, even more so than Star Trek, that introduces the franchise idea, and in that, merchandising. Toys, board games, puzzles, coloring books, masks, costumes, all kinds of stuff came out for kids when these movies were happening. Play sets, all of this before you even get to the television show. The television show does not do well in prime time and is eventually cut off probably before the season's even over, and then after that leads to a cartoon, which done by the same people who did the Star Trek animated series, which has also a short life. But at the same time, one thing that definitely kept these movies in the mind's eye is to kind of knowing that this is before video, this is before cable TV, this is before, you know, being able to own movies in your own home. What they did was 20th Century Fox put all the films back out and actually pitched them as marathons. So, you know, you could go to a theater and like, or essentially plop your kid at a theater and they would watch all the films for the day. You come pick them up at the end. So these are the ways that they definitely were out there marketing to keep these movies out there. So there was this huge ad campaign to keep Apes on the mind of the American children. Was really the thing. It wasn't really even aimed at adults. It was aimed at kids the whole time. But so this is where this is what makes Star Wars possible. This is what makes George Lucas saying, you know what? I want to put in my contract that if you make toys and T-shirts and all that, I get a cut. So it makes more sense now when you think about how in '77 someone who had like 2 movies to his name could have something like that in his contract. So another reason why Apes is so important. It leads to how we enjoy movies after it. And, you know, it is a science fiction franchise that took off. And after this, you see how Star Trek goes from being a show that was canceled to being a show that's renewed. And then a show that ends up having its movies. And then, you know, like, it's all kind of, everything builds. And Planet of the Apes is probably, more than any other series of science fiction, the ones that can kind of show a blueprint of how you can do it to keep it going so that long. So it's pretty impressive when you think about it in that perspective. Speaking of franchising and merchandising, let's see some of the things in my collection. I can safely say that I was born just a little bit too late to be at the height of the ape phenomena. The series was already in reruns when I was a kid, and it was still on television a lot. I'm going to say that that's up there with some of the things like when I grew up, putting on TV on the weekend, you saw a lot of Godzilla movies, you saw a lot of Planet of the Apes, and you know, it was pretty abundant on television still, even though the movies were over, the series was over. But it was definitely part of the zeitgeist, but it was already also considered old. It was like for kids older than me, like remembering things that they liked. So I wasn't really there for the height of it. I do remember my siblings having like a board game, I think, a puzzle, like I want to say kind of like a Ewok Village kind of playset, similar for what the TV show had, that had a couple action figures, and I had the action figures when I was a kid, but they went the way of all things that children have. But so what things was I able to get? In the 90s, there was a bit of a resurgence because we were hitting like a big anniversary mark for the series. I know the VHS, I had the whole VHS set. I bought them individually. They weren't really as a box set back then. So as the movies were coming out, I was picking them up. That was for, I believe, the 30th anniversary, so that would have been the end, you know, 98, around then. Also around that time, there were a couple of action figures that came out. My favorite that I've had probably since about 99 is the Log River statue right here. Pretty cool stuff. I remember getting this at a comic shop at the time, and I was just impressed they had it. I had to buy it. A little after that, a couple years later, I did pick up this Zira figure. I mean, I'm pretty in love with Zira as a character. She's kind of, yeah, see some similarities? Anyway. So, my Zira figure I've had for a long time. There was also, more recently, these I kept in the box for display purposes only, because I had run out of ways to show them off otherwise. So I kept them in the box to do these. We have, again, Zira and Cornelius. Both of these sets, I want to say, this set and the one that the Zira was from, had 2 or 3 figures in the set. They weren't huge sets, but like this one has 3 each series, so this is Series 1 and Series 2. These are brought to us by Mecha, right? NECA Real Toys line make a lot of great movie figures. I mean, had to get these, right? And yeah, I usually take my toys out and play with them, but these, I didn't have any place left to put them up on a shelf, so I hang them on boxes. So that's what I have as far as figures. This came out around 2000, 2001. is the Behind the Planet of the Apes documentary. This DVD set is a 2-disc set, comes with the full 2-hour documentary, and the second disc has other extras that they mined to make the documentary, as well as a full, I believe, 1-hour interview just with Roddy McDowall. Roddy McDowall hosts the documentary on the first disc. This is pretty much like the Bible of information out there is in here. Can't not have this one if you're a fan. I believe there's the Blu-ray set that I did skip of the series is the one that has the ape head. I believe this is included with that, but I didn't know where the hell I was going to put an ape head. Hard to rationalize that one for me. So this is the box set that we've been looking at today. This is the 5 film collection. I did at one point have all of them on DVD. Unfortunately, I started to get rid of some of those when I bought the Blu-ray set, but I did keep the ones that I had autographed already, which is the first one, which is signed by Linda Harrison over herself, and Battle for the Planet of the Apes, which this one's great because this is signed. Like I said, it's not my favorite in the series, but I was able to meet the actor who played McDonald, and it was really cool to meet him, so I made sure I held on to the DVD for him to sign. One thing I was able to collect as a fan of the series over the years from going to used bookstores were the novelizations. I have almost a complete set on those. Just to show you, like I showed you before, Boole's book, this is I made sure to get the edition from when the film came out, which is important to me. And I have Escape, Conquest, and Battle. Never did get beneath the... Funny things about these for me is that the covers don't always match, which is weird. It's like they're almost advertising a different movie. But Escape, we have the great family portrait image for that. Conquest, oddly enough, has the apocalyptic background from the final sequence, but shows Lisa, who is more, this is from the edited version where she says no when Caesar goes a little too deep in the violence, and so that's a little strange that it's not a picture of Caesar. And then Battle is an image from the end of Conquest. So I wonder if this was a novelization that came out before the movie was out, and instead of using the movie poster, they just grabbed a screenshot from the film before. Who knows? Who could say? But always interesting with tie-in. I like novelization tie-ins. They're fun. Other books I have about the series. The one I've had the longest is the Planet of the Apes Chronicles. There was this kind of dead period after like the 98 to 2000 range where the movies were not as popular. And this is a really good look at the films and some of the ideas and themes and whatnot going into them. I highly recommend this one. Some good essays in here. There's also the Planet of the Apes collectibles. So much like this show, it will show you what was out at the time, what there is to get. Had a lot of the emphasis, obviously, on the toys and things that came out as each of the movies was out. What types of stuff was out there for kids. Yeah, we got images of like the masks and the costumes that were out for Halloween, you know. Really early figures, you know. But in the collectible guide kind of style, it does have like at the time it was printed, what was the running rate for it. So if you want to see like, well, what was out? Oh, hey, look, there was a lunchbox out for the TV show. That's something to look for when you go to a convention. So, you know, it's interesting from that perspective. We've passed another milestone where the film is now 50 years, you know, over 50 years old. When the 50th year came out, there were a few books that looked into kind of the history of it. I picked up recently from Amazon, this had been price dropped since the anniversary's over, this really nice table, you know, coffee table book, The Evolution of the Legend, which essentially takes into account the entirety from the novel to the more recent films. Kind of a little curious. It almost seems like the modern trilogy that's out there, the CG based ones, may not have been done, or with the last one maybe it was just coming out when this book was being made. But it's some really beautiful images, like behind the scenes stuff and concept art and all those great things. If you want a little bit more background, you know, this is a very cool resource that I can recommend. So that's Evolution of the Legend. You'll note that I'm not going to go past the 5-film cycle, much like our focus for this series. I'm looking at the Blu-rays and special edition sets that I recommend. There is the remake. This is a topic for another day, I know. This is a whole other ball of wax. I don't even have it on Blu-ray, to be honest. It's still the DVD that I bought when it come out. I'll just kind of put it out there and kind of maybe in closing. The remake was... it's Tim Burton, who was a favorite film director of mine, treading some really soft ground on one of the classic franchises. It isn't what everybody wanted. It has some interesting ideas and some fun things that are thrown in there. Does it succeed as a film? Not particularly. Nothing about it was necessary to add to the story or the legacy of Planet of the Apes, in my opinion. I don't think it's awful, but you can tell this is something he really wanted to do as someone who grew up a fan. Some of the things he gets to realize are very cool. I do like how involved he got with all the actors that were playing apes, learning to move and, you know, kind of become kind of comfortable in that skin of being apes. I get all that. That's probably the making of the film is more interesting for me than the film itself at this point. As for the trilogy that came after, I gotta be totally honest and say that I have not watched all of them. I watched the first one, and I was a little not happy with it. It changed too much. I couldn't get into it. I should one day take a look at it as its own thing. Now that it's a trilogy, maybe that'll make that easier for me in retrospect with a lot of time away from it. Not necessarily for me. Not every remake is good. Not every remake is necessary. But I will give it a shot, because I try to watch everything, give everything the benefit of the doubt. We should always stay open-minded. But this episode is not about the rest of the Planet of the Apes. This is about the classic 5-film set. I say, we've all kind of, you're American, then you've grown up around it. I'd say most countries, if you're of this age range, that you were born in the 70s or the 80s, even if you were not the target audience maybe for these films, you grew up in a very aware of them, much like I did. It didn't grab everyone as kids, but I think as adults, when you go back and look at these films, you really see that there's a lot of messages in there, and that's what I love about it. So of my top reasons for watching Planet of the Apes, I will say first and foremost is the characterizations and performances from some amazing top A-list actors in Hollywood, not even genre, in Hollywood work of the late 60s, early 70s. I will also say some amazingly groundbreaking work in makeup effects and artistry around it. These films obviously could not live without the ability to make it believable, and the makeup crew, restrictions and all, do an amazing job with that throughout. Third, I think it's important to put it in perspective, like I've said before, with looking at Star Trek and Star Wars and other science fiction franchises after it, that it set the groundwork for that to be a possibility, for there to be franchised science fiction, and for there to be merchandised science fiction. This is an amazing kind of change the game way that Hollywood looked at the future, marketing alone. So you cannot forget that. But probably the fourth thing and the most important thing about all Planet of the Apes films is the deep-rooted messages that are ingrained in these movies. These films have the ability to sum up the frustrations and rage of a generation, to look at how they deal with classism, with racism, with the entwining of government and religion, the day-to-day bias and prejudice that we see in our country and others, remembering that this is originally a satire of looking at France in that time. So these things, there's the anti-nuke message, there's the pro-environmental message, there's the overall idea that war is bad, war is wrong, and non-violence, while it may seem impossible, is the best way. That's a lot of messages. It's a lot of films. But I think they're all smart and clever about the way they don't ram them down your throat. They don't force feed these messages to you. But they use storytelling and characters to make you understand them. And I think the older I get, the more I get from these films. And the more you look at them, the more you find. I think I've said a lot about these movies. I hope that maybe this will give you a chance to go back and revisit. If you didn't watch all of them, maybe it's time to check out the sequels. Sorry if I gave away the stories, but as you get into it, it'll be okay. It's hard to not spoil something 50 years old, but I hope you can appreciate what it is that I love about this and why it was important for me to break out of the horror genre and discuss some of these other important films I think everyone should watch. Thanks again for tuning in for my deep dive on my favorite science fiction series of all time. I hope you've enjoyed this look at the Planet of the Apes, and I hope you will go with me on this journey to look at not just horror films, but also some science fiction films that I think are important parts of modern cinema. See you next time.
You don't have to find an interdimensional saloon to have a pint of alien beer with me, Chrissy Garrison. Just tune into my Alien Beer podcast each Thursday, and I'll share my speculative fiction stories with you. And every other week, I'll be serving up a new installment in my science fiction serial, The Multiverse Blues. Meanwhile, catch up with me at sillyhatbooks.com/podcast. See you there.
This has been a presentation of the Project Entertainment Network.